Greetings, Six Centers. Some of you may find the language in this episode offensive. Listener's discretion is strongly advised.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Six Center.
Hear ye, come one, come all. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Man, got a few extra listeners on this title.
Yes, porn and Poutine.
So, Mr. Wise Man, what's with the title? Why don't you break it down for the listener?
Yeah, so porn and Poutine, what we'll be talking about is Pornhub. And I didn't know this, but its headquarters is in Montreal.
The home of Poutine.
Right? And I can already see some people seeing this popping up in their news feeds. Porn and Poutine. These are a few of my favorite things. It's like...
don't tell Tyra that one. I'm just kidding.
It's crazy because people are going to be like, okay, I'm listening. Who don't usually listen. So welcome, new listeners. And you're in for a edifying time.
Hopefully we have your attention.
Hopefully, yeah, right? So basically, the New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof reported that Pornhub was monetizing videos featuring child rapes, revenge pornography, spy cam videos of women showering, racist and misogynist content, and footage of women being asphyxiated in plastic bags. The fallout was swift, and within days, both Mastercard and Visa stopped processing payments from the adult streaming site following the internal reviews. Pornhub responded by saying it would bar unverified users from uploading and downloading content from the site. In a more sweeping action that followed it, then it said it would suspend all videos on its site that were not uploaded by its content partners or verified performers, purging nearly 2/3 of its site's uploads.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a pretty interesting. I mean, if you think about it, they've cut like 10 million videos.
Yeah, so it's going to be a controversial one. For those of you who, this will be your warning before we go in. We're going to try to make this a stumble-free episode, so there will be no name dropping
or explicit content.
Well, I mean, we just talked about asphyxiation and all that other stuff, but we won't be name dropping any adult stars. Right? Because you know how that goes when you're listening to a podcast. You're like, who? Let me Google that real quick.
And
Right? So we
don't be Googling those names at work.
Yeah.
Eh? Who's this guy talking about?
Yeah, so we're not. Yeah, there was going to be no name dropping in this episode. So, and if there's any of this bothers you, then you've been warned. And
yeah. What I find a little bit interesting just is the announcement that, so I have an article from PC Mag, sort of covering the topic. And what's kind of interesting is there's in the article, they have a tweet from like Pornhub area. I don't know what that means. Like maybe it's their disclosures or press release web version of whatever the Twitter handle. There's a quote that says, the new verified uploaders requirement. This means that every piece of Pornhub content is from verified uploaders, a requirement that platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Snapchat, and Twitter have yet to institute. So, like, it seems like they're trying to present themselves as somehow post this problem. They're like the leaders. It was just. I was surprised when I read that. So again, I'll have some articles from Vice, New York Times, this PC Mag, in the show notes page for you to do some reading that is let's say safe for work reading. Although maybe you should be working if you're at work.
Yeah. Okay, so to let the listeners know the direction we'll be going in, so we're going to be looking at, is there a difference between pornography and rape? And then the next thing we're going to be looking at is an economic aspect of what is a monopoly and what is antitrust law. And then looking at the Canadian aspect, why does Canada host a company that inflicts rape videos on the world? And this is a quote from the article. And then lastly, we'll look at solutions. Okay, so with that said, let's look at, is there a difference between pornography and rape? Because the author notes that there is a difference. So this article, which talks about Pornhub, mainly he tells stories of young girls who ended up on the website because they recorded themselves naked and passed the videos on to some boys they liked at school. And then the boys passed it on, and then the videos ended up on Pornhub. Now, what's crazy is that every time they tried to take it down, it always got re-uploaded. But the content is basically, telling these stories, but also showing how Pornhub kind of acts as a trafficker of pornography and sex trafficking and promoting rape. But one of the key arguments, and I think that kind of anchors this discussion in this article, is he makes a distinction between rape and pornography. And he makes a comment along the lines of, can we be sex positive and rape negative?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, you can sort of, what is the definition?
Or I think it was or pornography. No, rape negative. I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, being sex positive and rape negative, right? I mean, I think what he's trying to get at is is being sex positive have consequences, right? And so he's asking the question: how do we strike the balance as a culture? Because obviously our culture has become very much, sex positive.
Mm-hmm. I think the key thing is what we want to do is make sure that we're defining our terms. And so we want to define what is pornography. And so the Bible makes reference to pornography as it relates to sexual immorality. And I think you have a definition of that, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, the Bible doesn't obviously use the word pornography, the root word being porneia. I'll say the general definition being illicit sexual intercourse or activity from a biblical perspective. So this is from BibleStudyTools.com. And specifically, it's in sort of a King James Version, New Testament, Greek lexicon. So the definitions include adultery, fornication, homosexuality, lesbianism, intercourse with animals, sexual intercourse with a close relative, intercourse with a divorced man or woman. And so from a biblical perspective, it's using essentially it would include anything that is, deemed outside of a marriage between a man and a woman.
And then what's the secular definition?
Secular definition would probably, in a general sense, fall under prostitution.
That's interesting.
Culturally, I think, they're not to say that that's a broad speaking perspective. Me being a little bit more libertarian leanings, I'd have some pushback against that. But the terminology of illicit sexual activity arguably is a very subjective term. Like, everybody could have a different line in the sand of what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, depending on what you're using as your moral standard to identify. So, as Christians, when we use the Bible, it seems pretty clear where that line is between appropriate and inappropriate for sexual content or sexual activity.
He says that the issue is not pornography, but rape. Let's agree that promoting assaults on children or on anyone without consent is unacceptable. The problem with Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein was not the sex, but the lack of consent. And so it is with Pornhub. So going forward, I think that making sure that we define what what the term pornography means is going to mean a lot in how we find or how we look to solutions to the problem. So, for example, for me personally, I would give the definition of pornography as out of context sex. Out of context sex, according to the biblical definition.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're talking about, if you're using pornography as a, as a reference to, for a Christian, as a reference to what, leads to lust, or what leads to wandering eyes, or what, is going to lead to temptation, you're going to use a definition vastly beyond what people would think of, right? I mean, women in very small bikinis could qualify based on, the way that I previously was referring to it. And so, yeah, it's important to make sure we find the guidelines, but it's also important to make sure we're identifying what we're talking about, what we're not talking about, right? So in the sense of, in the conversation about pornography, appropriate, inappropriate, the idea of this, Mindgeek or Pornhub, the content that they have, we're speaking about it in a particular manner with regards to legality, and we're speaking about appropriateness from a culture perspective.
Yeah. And to be clear, what I'm saying is that, or what I'm arguing is that pornography gives way to rape, and that, like I said, out of context sex.
Yeah, I think
so. I wouldn't separate the two. So I would disagree with him. I like where he's kind of parsing it. I'm just like, no, one leads to the other.
So what would be the logical, like for you? Because I mean, many listeners sort of, whether if they're not Christian or if they're, they would say, well, I don't see a problem with porn. So how are you drawing the connection between
porn and rape?
I
would say that sin is progressive. That's the theological, but then the medical is that the dopamine in the brain eventually you become the word is desensitized to what is getting you aroused, and you want to get more. So then you become more depraved, or you look for more deeper what's the word? Graphic or more graphic content to get you aroused. So then you kind of go down into a deeper well in regards to looking for content that is a lot more graphic. So like, you can go from one extreme to the other without getting too explicit, but yeah, you would eventually be desensitized to the rape and get to actually liking rape or whatever other fetishes are out there.
Yeah, I mean, the progressive nature of pornography addiction to some extent. And I wish I haven't been able to find it. I remember seeing years ago an interview on Darnell. I don't know if you've seen this. I want to say with like a serial killer or serial rapist. I want to say it was like Focus on the Family.
Yes.
Or, I don't remember. He was basically
Jeffrey Dahmer, I think it was.
Yeah, speaking about his secret, and so I'll try and find it and put in the show notes page if I can find it.
And I think he used to take like roadkill, and then he'd find roadkill on the road, take it home, and then masturbate on it.
Yeah, well,
like that.
I think the one I'm thinking of, and I don't know, maybe it's the same, maybe it's different, but like, was that this guy was, pornography was like his secret that essentially he felt like led him, continually to progress into wanting to do more perverse things. And in that sense, that's where I think you're drawing the connection. And it's not that, let's call it one item of pornography inherently means rape or leads to rape. It's that the culture of pornography, of being in, from a biblical perspective, entertaining illicit sexual content, and inappropriate arousal has consequences.
Yeah.
And arguably those consequences include a greater prevalence of rape.
Yeah. So things eventually get worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's that insatiable appetite for sin. So, yeah. Now, looking at the economic aspect of this, we see that he says Pornhub is owned by Mindgeek, a private pornography conglomerate with more than 100 websites, production companies, and brands. Its sites include RedTube, YouPorn, XTube, SpankWire, ExtremeTube, Men.com, My Dirty Hobby, Thumbzilla, PornMD, Brazzers, and GayTube. There are other major players in the porn outside of Mindgeek, the Mindgeek umbrella, most notably Xhamster, Xvideos, but Mindgeek is a porn titan. If it operated in another industry, the Justice Department could be discussing an antitrust case against it. So here's the question: what is an antitrust law, Joel?
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I was there's an episode with so I was on Kazingram actually this past weekend. The episode will come out a little bit later, but we were sort of talking about antitrust laws.
Shout out to IJ.
Shout out to IJ and Amos.
IJ's such a good dude.
Yeah,
man. Make sure you guys subscribe.
Bro. Amos too.
Yeah, shout out to Amos too. Yeah, those are good guys.
Yeah. So I was on with both of them. We'll make sure to share it on our social media.
Kazingaram dialogue.
Video podcast. So check it out. Anyways, but we were talking, and the point I'm about to make, we will hash through a little bit more. So that's why I bring it up. But in general, antitrust laws are based on the idea of preventing monopolies. Now, on the episode, I made the point that I think it's a false premise because the only monopolies we truly see in the last 200 years, i.e. since we've had property rights, are government created. Or if you're sort of looking at things like Google and different, today, that we would call that monopolistic. Not a monopoly. A monopoly means that there's an absence of competition. I mean, Darnell, you just listed, there are two other big competitors, which would mean that there still exists competition. And I don't want to speak to, like on that, on the show with Kazingagram dialogue, I spoke to a little bit of how competition would play itself out. Based on the nature of this industry, I don't really want to do that because I don't want to think about how the different vendors would compete. But the point that I really made is, think about the idea of, big companies that were leading never seemed to hold on no matter how big they were. The example I gave on that episode, and I'll say here is MySpace, right? A lot of people would say Facebook or Google is that today, but 5 years from now, are we going to be looking at Facebook and saying, well, it's kind of like MySpace? And the good example of that is none of the kids are on Facebook, right? All the kids think it's for their old aunts and uncles and old people.
Yeah.
Right. And so the point with regards to antitrust laws, I would argue that that antitrust laws are solving, generally speaking, they're solving government created problems with more government. And the reason I say government created problems is if you look at a scenario where you find small number of players in the industry, how much of that is due to the barriers in the industry that usually can be traced back to regulation, to government sort of mandating how it's supposed to happen. Perfect example being Canada with telecom. We have like almost no competition here, and hence why we pay the highest prices of everyone. But the ability to enter the market is excessively difficult due to the government's involvement. Or the U.S. equivalent would be FCC for our U.S. listeners.
Yeah, no, and I would add that antitrust laws are made to stop monopolies, but Mindgeek is not a monopoly because there's other competition from Xhamster and Xvideos. So it's not really that much of a powerhouse to say that it's this unstoppable monster that can't be stopped. But the reason why I wanted to make sure that's clear, because like even just for the listeners, that's just like a definition that you guys should be aware of what an antitrust law is and how it works and what is a monopoly.
I would just say the counter argument that someone would claim towards what you just said would be that we're trying to prevent it from becoming a monopoly. So it's sort of assuming the trajectory is a monopoly. And that's why I said, I consider the the problem with antitrust laws is this false premise that monopolies naturally occur in the market. So I agree with you totally, but I just wanted to make sure sort of what would be the response.
Of course, yeah, because I think that's important that a monopoly will be able to exist on its own, and there won't be any competition, but there is competition. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, what's funny, I think, if you really want to talk about sort of an oligopoly, that's a player.
What's an oligopoly?
So oligopoly is the idea of a small handful of players, right?
Working together.
Working a lot of times. Well, then you'd end up with the idea of a cartel. And from the economic models, which are overly simplistic, but they're useful. Generally, when you have a cartel, it's so the example that most people would understand would be OPEC. OPEC's a cartel. They agree to limit the supply of oil.
So it's OPEC.
The oil sort of conglomerate or agreement, international agreements. They agree to limit the supply of oil in order to kind of manipulate the price. Any one player in the cartel would be at an advantage to cheat. So to overproduce, you're going to make excess profits. So the economic models sort of show that even oligopolies, when you have these like small cartels, like the oil scenario, the cooperation between them does break down because everybody has an incentive to cheat the system.
Mm-hmm. And this will have significance as we go on to the next aspect and looking at it in the Canadian context. So,
I was going to say, just to reiterate and I think I'll come back to it later. The oligopoly here is, to some extent, is the credit card industry. The payment processing industry is so highly regulated. So, the players in the industry don't face competition because government really prevents. It's really hard for someone to become a new banking institution or a new payment processor because it's such a deeply regulated industry. And so when Visa, Mastercard, I think Discover Card was the other one, basically say, hey, we're cutting off your payment services, this company is like, well, we don't have any other option. We have to follow. And I'm not saying that I didn't want them to make the decision they made, which was deleting what sounds to be 10 million videos of, potentially horrible videos. Yeah, it's just be aware that there's multiple layers to this, let's say monopoly or oligopoly part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And so what we'll see is it play out in the form of in the Canadian context. And so we see that nominally based in Luxembourg for tax reasons, Mindgeek is a private company run from Montreal. So it does not disclose who owns it, but it is led by Ferris Antoun and David Tassilio, both Canadians who declined to be interviewed. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada calls himself a feminist and has been proud of his government's efforts to empower women worldwide. So a question for Trudeau and all Canadians: why does Canada host a company that inflicts rape videos on the world?
So obviously this is a inflammatory or a loaded question. From a logical perspective, arguably it's not a fair question. If I was to reword this, the question would be, is this something Canadians should be concerned about?
I interpreted it as him saying, well, why doesn't the king of the country, quote unquote, stop this monster?
So my first inclination is to go back to our episode on NIMBYism, because that's the same question. Not in my backyard, right? Like we're addressing it in a much different fashion or in a different way.
That's good.
Right? But we're sort of saying, well, I think because we have this geographical association that I somehow, me as a Canadian, what gives me the right to tell this company how to use its property? Right. So I'm flipping the question around. Like, why do we as Canadians have no? Again, let's assume we've, the rape videos and all that stuff's gone. What if Canadians thought this company itself the remaining 3 million videos, although nothing illegal, still pornographic, let's say as a culture we deemed that it was inappropriate. What is the appropriate, as Canadians, what is the appropriate response? And I'm sort of trying to demonstrate that there has to be a balance between just simply telling them, oh, this is what you're required to do with your assets, right? Because property, as a property rights proponent, I see sort of the counter arguments we gave with NIMBYism.
Not in my backyard.
Yeah, not in my backyard.
Yeah,
we were talking about a number of things. So, yeah, it just, to me, the question, as I said, it seems a little bit inflammatory, a little bit loaded, because he's sort of trying to ask it in the worst possible way to get the response that he wants, which is to say, like, we shouldn't. This should never have been allowed. These should have been shut down earlier.
Right. With the rape and the child porn. And the way how I look at this question is that even if Trudeau wanted to do something, I don't think he can, because just because you can't stop. The word is the sexual urge. It's kind of like water, right? You have water damage. If water's leaking anywhere, it's going to go to all over the places. So it's kind of like if you squash or crush the porn industry online, I don't even want to think about what black market, in which ways it'll manifest itself. Mm-hmm. Right? Because the sex is not going to stop. People's hunger for sexual entertainment, it's as old as humanity.
Yeah.
Right. So that isn't something that you're going to say, okay, we're going to shut down this office because and we, everybody knows this. Like, technically, people make porn from the comfort of their home. Yeah. Right.
I mean, people make YouTube videos from the comfort of their home. They can make any kind of video from the comfort of their home these days, right?
Yeah. Like, and anybody can do it. You don't need a camera and good lighting.
No.
Right.
Selfie.
You need an iPhone 6, or less, and then you can upload it, and it is what it is.
Belief in Fatherhood, right? Like, he basically started his YouTube channel with old iPhones that he just repurposed, right? So, I mean, obviously much different, but at the end of the day, medium, today's quality cameras can do almost anything, right? So,
yeah. So I think that that's putting too much hope in government.
Yeah. Now, I would say that, based on let's say child pornography laws that we have in this country, there could be an argument, and this is where I would think, again, less inflammatory question, but appropriate question is there not something that the government should have been doing? Whether, now, I'm assuming, it says the company is nominally based in Luxembourg for tax reasons, but it's private company. Is a private company run from Montreal. So let's assume its servers are in Montreal, which means that this child pornography is on Canadian soil, right? How would we treat Joe Schmo who has child pornography on his computer, right? So why does this company have a different standard, arguably, right? So this is where I was saying the question he's asking is inflammatory, sort of speaks of NIMBYism, as opposed to what is the legality of hosting technically illegal pornography in Canada on Canadian soil. I don't know the answer, but I would assume if they really wanted to, they could have targeted them. Now, the political capital to pull that off, whereas, this guy's, maybe they could have done it after this guy's article came out, after exposing, there was an expose against them, but the credit card companies moved much quicker and did it for us, or did it for the Canadian government. But, I would still ask the question, is there legal ramifications? Because, they've profited off of this, which then means they've incentivized further human trafficking and things like this.
Right. But, and I think part of the issue isn't porn, like he said, like the author said. It's not, the issue is not porn, it's rape.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah,
it's
violating
rape
of other people.
Right. And so, we got to get down to the nitty gritty of rape. And in regards to how they have attempted, and Pornhub has, Mindgeek has attempted to filter out these things, and they have attempted to make changes. Like you said, they've tried to take things down.
No, I mean, obviously the verified user approach, I think what that does is that means that...
Yeah, well actually, I'm about to get there to the solution. Yeah, so let's just talk about the solutions that they're offering right now, and see how it relates to Trudeau trying to stop, if he can stop, Mindgeek. And sorry, and for the listeners, like I said before, in point 2 about antitrust laws and monopolies, but my argument was just that if Trudeau were to stop Mindgeek, there's still
competitors.
There's still competitors. There's still X-Hamster. There's still X-Videos. There's still other outlets that are still going to thrive, and the problem is still going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume these other 2 websites have some prevalence of this type of content.
Yeah, and actually, in the article it says actually, some of the stuff is a lot more depraved. It's worse. Oh. But let me just get to the solutions that are being offered. So then he says, and call me prude, but I don't see why search engines, banks, or credit card companies should bolster a company that monetizes sexual assaults on children or unconscious women. If PayPal can suspend cooperation with Pornhub, so can American Express, Mastercard, and Visa. I don't see any neat solution, but aside from limiting immunity so that companies are incentivized to behave better, here are 3 steps that would help. Allow only verified users to post videos, prohibit downloads, increase moderation, and these measures won't kill porn or much bother consumers of it. YouTube thrives without downloads. And for point 3, where he talks about increased moderation, it's talking about people who are basically they moderate or monitor the content on these websites. So, for example, and it says here in the article that Pornhub employs about, let me see here. Okay, so it says here, while Pornhub would not tell me how many moderators it employs, I interviewed one who said that there are about 80 worldwide who work on Mindgeek sites. By comparison, Facebook told me it has 15,000 moderators. So with 1.36 million new hours of video uploaded a year to Pornhub, that means that each moderator would have to review hundreds of hours of content each week. The moderators fast forward through videos, but it's often difficult to assess whether a person is 14 or 18, or whether torture is real or fake. Most of the underage content involves teenagers. The moderator I spoke with said, but some comes from spy cams in toilets or changing rooms and shows children only 8 to 12. This is what one of the moderators said. The job in itself is soul destroying.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like, man, imagine, like, if I would not want that job. I would not take that job, right? Like, I mean, you'd have to be desensitized. You would become desensitized.
You would be desensitized.
Like, but the other side of it that I was going to say is there's also, like, think about the users, right? How many people on Facebook as a percentage are willing to complain when someone posts something inappropriate? What, like, forget sexually inappropriate, just inappropriate, foul language, like things get flagged all the time. How often do you think things get flagged on a porn site?
Well,
like, my point is that the content that the user is willing to accept is that is probably, one, I don't know anything, but like, do you have to be a registered user to flag content? right? Do you like, what are the requirements to flag content? And I'm assuming most users are just sort of like willing to, well, that was weird.
Yeah.
Like,
and so, but here's the pushback in the unintended consequences. Another economic term we need to.
Before you do, I was trying to demonstrate there's a lack of incentive for Pornhub to hire more people because there's no complaints from the users. Whereas Facebook has an incentive to hire more moderators to lower the number of complaints because that's going to improve the user experience. If Pornhub was having a significant number of complaints, I would assume it's going to drive its moderators up in order to reduce complaints.
Yeah, but since then, they Pornhub's been trying to clean up its act, and they've been more forthcoming with reporting things. Mm-hmm. So they have been cleaning it up. So don't want to misrepresent them, but they are trying to clean it up. But there was some unintended consequences because it sounded like a good idea for Visa and Mastercard to cancel the transactions being done on the site. But what happened was that, and this is an article from Vice.com, so it'll be in the show notes, and it's sex workers, what Visa and Mastercard dropping Pornhub means for performers. And so the article was talking about sex workers and activists say that this is a dangerous, discriminatory decision, one fueled by anti-porn campaigners and conservative activist groups who want sex work abolished. In a statement published Friday, Sex Workers Outreach Project Behind Bars wrote that the decision will force more sex workers into the margins, calling it a war on sex workers. And it says, we say war against sex workers because the damage they do does not impact the laborer, but labor as much as it affects the laborers who depend on Pornhub's platform to earn a living. It wrote, violence against sex workers includes the social and institutional violence that has led to the shuttering of our online platforms that give us a measure of safety and allow us the critical resource that is the ability to access banking.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and this is sort of why I was talking about the monopoly on payment processing, right? Because now they have a crazy amount of power,
but hold on. But what about PayPal? Because I think PayPal still allows these things to happen. And also, there's also. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, my point was just that, as this article sort of laying out that there are, it's not easy to replace that payment processing. And that's where I just wanted to bring up, we were talking about one potential monopoly, but this is, the same type of concerns of monopolistic behavior is what Visa, MasterCard, and Discover, credit card companies can do because they have so much influence or power. That's simply my point. Is just let's, not forget to look at this in all directions to some extent.
Yeah, and I guess part of what we're looking at is there's an alternate victim, and that's the sex workers, because the article goes on to say much of the content on Pornhub is free to view, but for many performers, Pornhub was a stable revenue stream. The platform's verified amateur program, as well as the clip selling service, Model Hub, and ad revenue made on video uploads make up a constellation of ways performers can make money on Pornhub. So Christoph's inability to see a neat solution erases the fact that many people rely on tube sites like Pornhub for their livelihoods. Even though these sites are incredibly flawed, it's not prudish to suggest child exploitation should stop, and it's willfully ignorant to suggest that it would be. Everyone agrees on that, including Pornhub. Suggesting all payments on the site should be dropped is, however, callous and myopic.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the sex worker conversation is a difficult one in general, because if we look at something like prostitution as the legacy of sex work, in that industry, one of the biggest problems was the sex worker was, property, right? Like you had the pimp who took all their money, right? But offered protection, right? And so this is where, there's different things. I remember years ago, so Canada changed its prostitution laws in a way that was sort of better in the sense that, like, you stopped. It made it illegal to so the Canadian change was in 2014 by the Conservative government, made it illegal to purchase or advertise sexual services and illegal to live on the material benefits of sex work. Although it is legal to sell sexual services in some cases, is illegal to solicit in public areas. So that's sort of the Canadian context. There's a documentary called Red Light, Green Light that came out around the time that the Canadian law was changing, and they were promoting sort of the Nordic model because so many girls in the industry would be victims. Well, you're essentially criminalizing a victim for coming forward, right? So you're in the sex industry, you're being trafficked or exploited. Well, you have to admit to doing something illegal in order to get help. And so the Nordic model essentially punishes the purchase or the sex buyer as opposed to the provider. And it would also punish the pimp for exploiting the individual. So while it made prostitution illegal, the actual people getting charged was essentially those who were least likely to be the victim. And so I just bring that up to say, if we look at prostitution, and now we've migrated to this online digital form where arguably, the girls can be, or I shouldn't just say girls, but the the individual who's providing services is arguably a lot safer, right? Because they're, it's not like the person that's could rape them, through the camera.
Although the rape is happening, and even with the moderators.
But I mean, the violation of their rights, it's voluntary, right?
Okay, yeah.
Right, that's sort of what I was trying to get at, that, like, now, I mean, the libertarian side of me says, okay, I might think this is immoral, but the question of, should it be illegal? Should it be punished? Should we, from a cultural perspective, how do we find the balance between, trying to cultivate the society that we think is the best and not enforcing that on other people?
Well, yeah, and kind of like what you talk about in regards to property rights, and people's property being themselves as their first property being violated, in the sense of a rape. And one of the questions I had in my mind when I was thinking about it, I was like, yeah, well, how do you like, because especially for some people who want to watch rape acted out versus actually being done. And so for the moderators who are watching it, they're kind of like, okay, well, how do I know what I'm watching is acting or is it real? And the article answers that in the sense that, like, some guys will go to the extreme and they will, like, show the girl passed out, and they'll lift up the eyelids and poke her eyes to prove that she's out before they do the rape, or whatever the case may be. And so there's instances that are obvious, and like the guy said, sometimes he can't tell. He's not sure if it's a person's underage or overage, and that makes policing it a lot harder in coming to that. And it's just there's just a whole bunch of mess, because it's not just the rapes, but there's just like other crazy things that happen online that shouldn't be online as well. And so when you look at the sex worker, one of the sex workers was arguing, I'm not going to say the person's name, the entertainer, but they say sex workers are often the most vocal, constructive critics of the platforms they use. And many have been trying to get Pornhub to change its unverified upload policies for years. 6 months ago, adult person's name started a petition specifically to ask Pornhub to change its upload policies to make them safer. No one wants sexual abuse imagery to proliferate on the internet, let alone on the site they use every day for income. But Pornhub's policy shift seems to have come too late. So to answer your question, like, yeah, there are people on these sites that don't want that kind of material on it because it just ruins, it ruins their income. But with Visa withdrawing, it hurts the workers as well, the people who are doing it legitimately.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
Yeah, and that's a tough question, right? Because it's sort of the sweatshop conversation to some extent, right? We think sweatshops are immoral, and so we try to boycott that company, but turns out that that sweatshop workers are the top 50% income earners in those countries, and so when the sweatshop shuts down, those people end up doing worse work.
Unintended consequences.
The unintended consequence, right? So it's I think it's a good that we highlight this because it demonstrates that there's no easy solution. I mean, the solution from a Christian perspective is reforming culture, right? Like, yeah, sure, we want to get rid of the rape and videos of people being violated, right? The smut videos, as they used to be called, I think that's what that term refers to, right? That sure, I think everybody can agree that removing that is appropriate, but the unintended consequences of how that happened with payment processors being shutting down the services, it's easy for outsiders to go, well, this is clearly all good. Right, there's no unintended consequence because I just deem all this activity to be immoral.
I mean, and the company is trying because it is a business, right? So it has doubled the number of moderators in the last couple of years, and one of the moderators
40 to 80
or 160, I guess. I don't know. The moderator told him. The author of the article said the moderator told him this year. Pornhub began voluntarily reporting illegal material to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children after previously dragging its feet in removing videos of children and non-consensual content. Pornhub now is responding more rapidly. It has also compiled a list of banned content. I obtained a copy of this list, and it purports to bar videos with terms or themes like rape, preteen, pedophilia, and bestiality. It helpfully clarifies that this includes eels, fish, octopus, and insects.
So random.
But it also talks about diapers are okay if, and then this is in quotes, if no scatophilia. Mutilation depends on context, but cannot depict severing parts of the body. What's scatophilia?
I don't even want to know. I don't want to Google it.
You don't want to Google it.
I'm assuming the diaper scenario issue is that like some adults wear diapers and there's lots of context where diapers could be.
Some people are straight up freaks, man. Like, man, and this is, this is crazy. And it goes back to my first point. Out of context sex and the sinful nature of man, it is progressive. It only gets worse. And so, sometimes, So sometimes, we're people are sitting here listening, and they're probably like, what the heck is going on in the world? But yeah, there's some people that get into some really freaky stuff, and again, that's sin progressing. And what it talks about in Genesis chapter 5 or 6, where the heart of man is continually on sin. Man is creative in their sin. So let me ask you this, Joel. What's your 2 cents?
Wow. This is such a convoluted, complex scenario, right? Like on the first hand, it's easy for me to be like, I agree with this. These are things I'm morally opposed to. If I can avoid my kids ever being exposed to porn, I will, right? Like, so in that sense, there's an aspect where I want this industry, I don't want it to be a temptation for me. I don't want it to be a hindrance to my children. I don't want it to be, a hindrance to the men around me, to the people around me, right? So in that sense, there's an aspect where it's easy for me to go, I agree with these actions on a moral point. But the question of what I think is morally appropriate and...
In regards to liberty?
Well, liberty is sort of where I'm, there's, and not just liberty, but like morally, am I, from a biblical standpoint, am I called to impose my morality on other people? I would argue I'm called to call them to morality. I'm not called to box them into a place where they can only live under what I determine is the appropriate morality. That's the only place that applies, is those that are under my responsibility, right? So my kids, when they're not old enough to make the decisions for themselves, sure, I put them in a box that prevents them from harming themselves. But from a biblical standpoint, I think even historically, when we were, when Christians were in control of the law, control of government, maybe we too easily were willing to enforce the morality we deemed the right morality. So, yeah, I mean, the point I'm trying to get at is that I definitely have a level of conflict, internal conflict with this issue, because I agree with
the liberty aspect.
Well, the consequences from a moral point, but I have concerns with the liberty perspective that, are we setting the stage, right? I mean, not to go down the road, but like think about what's happened with Trump recently with getting censored off social media, right? Do I want people who I morally opposed to be cut off from payment services, from financial services, from right?
So you're saying it's like a slippery slope.
Yeah, like that's where I see the issue of like, where is the balance between okay, let's argue that they've done what they need to do, they purged all this content. Is there, and again, I know the industry is sort of complicated in this sense, but is there a road to redemption? Or Visa and Mastercard be like, nope, you're done. And now, to your point, the slippery slope of, oh, well, this person in power disagrees with the Amish. Therefore, we're just going to take their land. Like, again, it's sort of the difficulty of
balance. Would you say it's a balance?
Yeah. There's a balance between, yeah, sure, I don't want to do business with people I'm morally opposed to. Right. I always say, like, vote with your dollar. Right. But by the reason I brought up the monopolistic side or the oligopoly side with payment processors, because they're so highly government regulated, there's a barrier to entry. Now, things like, on our 2020 New Year's episode, our 2019 New Year's episode, we talked about Bitcoin as being one of the big things for the next 20 years, the next decade. It was first five, last five, next five or something. Mm-hmm. Top five, next five. I can't remember what we called it, but Bitcoin was one of those things because that's actually arguably that concept of digital or crypto transactions, cryptocurrencies will break some of this cartel or financial oligopoly that is existent. So I don't know. It's interesting. Arguably this would create space for cryptocurrencies to move in and say, okay, here's how we can help you. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's a digital platform or an online platform that nobody really has control of. And you can't really gatekeep the way Visa and Mastercard can gatekeep. So I don't know. That's sort of I know I didn't bring it up in the episode till now, but it was sort of something that was on my mind, that I wonder if cryptocurrencies become a means to solve some of this problem, because it allows people who are voluntarily willing to exchange with each other not have to have some third party gatekeep them. So what about you? What's your 2 cents?
Well, I would say that, like I said before in the start of the show, that pornography is out of context sex. Right? So I'll say it again. Pornography is out of context sex. That's why we started with the definition in the start. And I'm standing by the biblical definition. So look, today you can't tell people how to raise their kids, right? But I'm going to tell you how to raise them anyways. Right? So I'm a big believer that social change starts in the home. So pornography is an untamable beast. It'll devour you and especially your kids. So porn is a drug that rewires the chemical balance of dopamine in your brain. So think about how you struggle as a grown man or woman. And now think about what that does to a young person's developing brain. You can't save the men raping girls and women, or the boys passing around the pictures of naked girls in their class, but you can save your son. You can't save these women and girls on these sites, but you can save your baby girl. So take away their phone until they can pay the bill, right? They won't die, right? You didn't, right? So limit the screen time. Teach them how to use the phone responsibly. And finally, last but not least, teach them about sex in context by reading God's text.
So for the listener, give us your 2 cents. Hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, for now, before we get censored. I'm just kidding.
If there's anything that we missed, because I feel like there were some things that were missed and that could have been unpacked further. So please hit us up. Let us know if you enjoyed the show, if you enjoy the content. For you new listeners, subscribe,
share, give us a review.
Give us a review on iTunes because it helps to promote the show, whatever platform you're listening on. Hey, even if you want to start a new account on another platform and listen to another one and put a review up, please, we would greatly appreciate that. If you're trying to get in contact with me, it's Darnell Samuels on Facebook. Do go to Darnell on Twitter and Instagram. So that's spelled DOGUDDA_Darnell.
And I'm T Joel N39 everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
And our Gmail.
sixcentsreport@gmail.com. Give it this is I'm definitely interested in what the listeners...
episode.
Yeah, I'm interested in what the listeners have to say. I mean, maybe you think we dropped the ball on an aspect. Maybe we didn't talk about an aspect of this. Or maybe you appreciate how we addressed it. So give us your 2 cents.
6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?